Imagine, if you will, a room in Naples in 1974. The air is stagnant, heavy with the dust of an old gallery, Studio Mora. In the center of this space stands a woman, motionless, her eyes fixed on a middle distance that separates her from the reality of the room. She is Marina Abramović, and tonight she is not a person. She has declared herself an object. Beside her sits a long table covered in a white cloth, reminiscent of a surgeon's station or perhaps a sacrificial altar. On this table lie 72 distinct items. They are a chaotic inventory of human desire and destruction, a curated selection that spans the spectrum of our capability for tenderness and our capacity for violence. There is a feather, delicate and soft. There is a rose, vibrant and fragrant. There is a bottle of perfume, honey, a grape, a glass of water. These are the tools of pleasure, the instruments we use to soothe, to adore, to sustain. But lying uncomfortably close to these benign artifacts are their sinister counterparts: a scalpel gleaming under the gallery lights, a box of razor blades, a whip, chains, and, most terrifying of all, a pistol with a single bullet sitting beside it. The instructions provided to the audience are terrifyingly simple, pasted on the wall like a museum placard. There are 72 objects on the table that one can use on me as desired. I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility. For the first hour, the room is thick with hesitation. The audience, conditioned by centuries of museum etiquette, treats her like a fragile sculpture. They are tentative, almost apologetic. Someone approaches and gently places the rose in her hand. Another brushes her hair back from her face. A photographer snaps pictures, capturing the awkward smiles of a crowd that doesn't quite know what to do with absolute freedom. It feels like a collaborative performance, a gentle exploration of trust. They offer her water. They wipe a bead of sweat from her brow. At this stage, civilization holds firm. The social contract, that invisible web of manners and morality that keeps us from tearing each other apart, is intact. But look closer at Abramović's face during these early moments. There is a profound surrender there, a terrifying erasure of the self. By declaring herself an object, she has voluntarily abdicated her will. She is a canvas of flesh and bone, waiting for the first stroke. This passivity is the catalyst. It is a vacuum that demands to be filled. As the hours tick by, the novelty of kindness begins to wear off. The human mind, when presented with a lack of resistance, begins to probe the boundaries of its power. The atmosphere in the gallery begins to curdle. The playful touches become heavier. The gaze of the audience shifts from curiosity to possession. We are witnessing the slow death of the subject and the birth of the object, and with it the terrifying realization that without the threat of consequence, our benevolence is far more fragile than we dare to admit. The table of objects, once a curiosity, now looks like an arsenal waiting for a war to begin. As the third hour strikes, the gallery in Naples undergoes a metamorphosis. The polite veneer of the art crowd dissolves, revealing something primal and ugly beneath. The shift is not sudden, but insidious, like a rot spreading through fruit. It begins with small transgressions. Someone rearranges her limbs, moving her arms into awkward positions to see if she will resist. She does not. Emboldened by her catatonic state, another visitor takes the lipstick from the table and writes "end" across her forehead. The laughter that follows is nervous, sharp, but it breaks the seal. The barrier is down. The woman is gone. Only the doll remains. The escalation that follows is a textbook study in mob psychology and the Lucifer effect. Once the individual realizes they are anonymous within the crowd and that the authority figure, the artist herself, has absolved them of guilt, the moral compass spins wildly out of control. The tools of pleasure on the table are ignored. The crowd is now drawn magnetically to the tools of pain. A man takes the scissors and cuts her clothes, shredding the fabric until she stands half naked, exposed and vulnerable. This act of stripping her is symbolic. It is the removal of her social armor, reducing her to raw meat. Then the razor blades appear.
They are no longer just objects on a table, they are extensions of the audience's will. A person, perhaps someone who moments before had been sipping wine and discussing aesthetics, takes a blade and draws it across her skin. Blood beads on her neck. The crowd does not gasp in horror. They lean in. They are mesmerized by the reality of the blood, by the proof that this object can bleed. They press thorned rose stems into her flesh, decorating her pain. She is weeping now, silent tears streaming down a face that remains stoic, a mask of absolute endurance. But her tears do not solicit mercy. They seem only to provoke further cruelty. The climax of this 6-hour nightmare arrives with the gun, a loaded pistol, the ultimate arbiter of life and death. A small man in the crowd picks it up. He places the bullet in the chamber. He wraps Marina's own hand around the grip and points the barrel at her neck. His finger rests over hers on the trigger. The silence in the room is deafening. This is the precipice. We are no longer in an art gallery. We are in the heart of darkness. A fight breaks out, not between Abramović and her aggressor, but between factions of the audience. One group, horrified, tackles the man and throws the gun out of the window. But the fact that it happened, that a human being was willing to end a life simply because they were told they could, shattered the illusion of civilized society. The experiment had yielded its result. The monster is not a myth. It is us.
At 2 a.m., the gallery owner announces that the performance is over. The 6 hours are up. What happens next is perhaps the most disturbing and revealing moment of the entire piece. For 6 hours, Marina Abramović had been a statue, a vessel for the audience's projections. She had absorbed their lust, their rage, their curiosity, and their sadism without flinching. But now she reclaims her humanity. She begins to move. She is no longer the object. She is a woman, half-naked, bleeding, with trembling hands and eyes full of tears. She starts to walk towards the crowd, her gaze locking onto the faces of her tormentors. And then panic ensues. The people who had cut her, the people who had stripped her, the people who had watched a loaded gun pressed to her head, they cannot bear to look at her. They do not apologize, they do not offer help, they run. They scatter like cockroaches when the light is turned on. They flee the gallery in a chaotic rush, desperate to escape the judgment of the mirror she has become. This flight is the true indictment. As long as she was an object, they could justify their actions as art or experimentation. They could dissociate from their cruelty. But the moment she became a person again, the weight of their actions crashed down upon them. They were forced to confront the reality that they had tortured a living, breathing human being. Their inability to face her was an admission of guilt more powerful than any confession. They were terrified not of her anger, but of her humanity. Rhythm Zero remains a scar on the history of modern art, a terrifying testament to the fragility of our moral codes. It proved that civilization is often just a thin coat of paint over a savage structure, easily chipped away when authority is removed and anonymity is granted. Abramović did not just test her own limits that night, she tested ours. She offered herself as a sacrifice to the truth, and the truth was ugly. In those 6 hours, she showed us that evil is not always a grand orchestrated design. Sometimes it is just a room full of ordinary people, a table of objects, and permission to do whatever you want. As we look back on this piece, we must ask ourselves the uncomfortable question: if we had been in that room in Naples, standing before the table, which object would we have picked up? The feather or the gun?